Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, may I say at the very start what a great pleasure it is for me to be here with you this afternoon and to take part in this conference. And thank you for your warm welcome. And that said, I am of course acutely aware that I have drawn the short straw by being the first speaker after lunch. My husband told me at breakfast this morning quite cheerfully that I would be occupying the graveyard slot. There we go. But I guess some of you must be wondering what the High Sheriff of Norfolk is doing addressing a top-level conference on issues of mental health, particularly perhaps when she's an army wife with few credentials in the minefield of mental health care herself. Why is it then that I am so passionate about the issues that surround mental health today? Let me try and give you some sort of answer. I think the reasons are really twofold. Firstly, as a young army mum, I suffered 2 bouts of postnatal depression myself in the 80s, the first of which was never diagnosed or treated, but on reflection it certainly should have been. Second time round, it was only after weeks of being treated as a time waster and malingerer that a new GP realised what was going on, and I was given appropriate medication, which transformed my life almost instantaneously. Part of that may have been just the relief of being believed, and while neither occasion were huge on the great scale of things, they were quite bad enough for me to know that I never, ever wanted to go there again. And the second reason, I guess, was while my husband was serving in Germany in the mid-90s, and the 4 children were safely at school, I was approached and asked whether I would consider training for Relate as a relationship counsellor. This in turn led me to working over the years in a number of GPs' surgeries as their surgery counsellor, and then I trained further to work with adult survivors of childhood rape, incest and sexual abuse. I love my work, and if it has taught me one thing only, it is this: recovery from mental illness is not only possible, but in so many cases, it is absolutely what happens as the norm. And clients and patients go on to lead fulfilled, purposeful, and happy lives, not only to survive, in fact, but to positively thrive in every respect. So briefly, that is my background. And that is why, when I was invited to become High Sheriff of Norfolk, it was a no-brainer that I would choose mental health as the theme for my year. So how's it been? And what have I found across this wonderful county of ours? It would be very tempting to give you the bad news first, but instead I want to highlight the remarkable, tireless and dedicated work done across the entire sector by healthcare professionals, voluntary groups and individual carers alike. We have the most amazing men and women working in the mental health arena here in Norfolk, but all too often their work is unrecognised and undervalued. And without any question at all, it is of course grossly underfunded. And here, of course, we have the crux of the matter. Pollyanna was at school here in Norfolk with my 2 older boys. When she committed suicide last year in her early 30s, her mother drew attention to the different ways in which Pollyanna had fared while struggling with bipolar disease, and she, the mum, had been treated when presenting with breast cancer. The contrast could hardly be more startling or discouraging for those with mental health issues. Pollyanna never once received consistent treatment for her condition. She was passed from pillar to post, hospitalised occasionally in inappropriate wards, with no one to oversee her medication. As a result, she seldom took it. And at weekends from 5:30 on a Friday afternoon, she was pretty much left to her own devices until 9 o'clock on a Monday morning, when the service would restart for the week. We know that only 14%, just 14%, of those with mental health problems receive appropriate and timely intervention, treatment and support. Can you imagine the outcry if only 14% of us with broken limbs or various cancers were actually treated. Never has parity of funding or parity of esteem within the NHS been more necessary than here. And you know, all over the county, it is exactly the same story. It's been my enormous privilege to visit some truly exceptional charities and small not-for-profit organisations this year, doing fundamental and essential work in supporting some of the most marginalised and vulnerable men and women within our communities. But these organisations are running on a shoestring, and many are facing imminent closure, particularly in the more rural areas, that have already lost village post offices, shops, citizens' advice bureaus, mobile library services, Meals on Wheels, and the like. As you all know, isolation and loneliness can be a huge factor in depression. And I just want to break off there for a minute and just tell you what happened when I spent a day out with the Norfolk ambulance service recently. Our very first call, quite early in the morning, about 7:15, was from a lady in a really very affluent part of Norwich, and she reported living alone and suffering from breathing difficulties. So the blue light went on and we roared to her house. And there we found a lady who really wasn't physically ill at all, but she was terribly lonely. And apparently she makes a habit of ringing the ambulance service. It's to their credit that every single time they treat us an emergency. They were brilliant. They made her a cup of tea, they had a chat, they got her dressed. But this was a lady who was just lonely. So I just leave that story with you. And just last week, I was visiting a small group that runs from a community centre in Fakenham, and which opens its doors 3 days a week to those with problems around their mental health. I was speaking to a lady there who said, "Coming here, Pippa, it gives me a reason to get out of the bed in the morning. They are like family to me, and I love them. If this stops, I will lose my only reason for living." That little charity is entirely dependent on donations from the public, and they are drying up. There are no grants, and they are facing imminent closure. And depressingly, it is much the same story wherever I go. The withdrawal of grants, and don't even get me started on the personal budget business, is absolutely disastrous for charities and individuals alike. And it is not beyond the wit of man to realise the vastly increased costs that would be incurred by trying to replicate the services of these extraordinary charities by statutory bodies, or the knock-on effects for GPs, the Norfolk and Suffolk Mental Health Foundation, the County Council, district councils, and the like. You know, this really has got to change, and change soon. Only with regular funding for recreational and other day care centres, for art therapy, for proper ongoing therapeutic support, for befriending and for mentoring initiatives, only then will things really start to change. And finally, just one more thing. The word stigma in the dictionary translates as mark of shame. Mental illness, as we all know, is no respecter of age, culture, background, or class. How sad is it then that in this day and age, those with a mental illness, completely out of his or her control, can still feel too ashamed to talk about it? This culture of silence really must change too, if we are going to end discrimination and make a sustained and lasting difference to the mental health of citizens here in Norfolk. Thank you very much indeed.